Hello, and welcome to the Permaculture Vine podcast, where we talk about permaculture people and projects. I'm your host, Cormac Harkin, and today we have Rob Avis on. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Nice to have you on. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Do you want to just give a quick 30-second introduction, please, for those who don't know who you are?
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder of Fifth World. You may have also seen some of my content under Verge Permaculture. Been teaching permaculture design for the last 20 years. And Fifth World's extending that mission out. We do permaculture consulting, and we have a data solutions team that's working on what we call Fitbit for Planet Earth, which is essentially a data tool that allows us to get feedback on how healthy an ecosystem is with a very low marginal cost, as well as tracking its progress into the future after we do design and implementation.
Wow, I'm looking forward to hearing about that. But when did you start at the start? So how did you hear about permaculture to start with?
So I'm originally an oil and gas engineer. Actually, I always jump ahead. I actually grew up in a cake factory. So I'm Charlie in the Chocolate Factory originally. We had a 40,000 square foot, 4,000 square meter cake facility in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And we would produce 100,000 cheesecakes a day. And I say that because I'm from actually industrial food. I think it's an important part of my fingerprint. I then moved into industrial energy after my mechanical engineering degree and was the guy that brought natural gas and oil to refineries. I did that for quite a while, cut down a ton of forest, which I was not super proud of. I remember the day that I wanted to quit my job. I saw Jeff Lawton's Greening the Desert video. And after watching that and seeing this guy turn this meaningless piece of earth into meaningless, meaning it was degraded, wasn't doing anything. I think he said hypersaline soils, nothing growing there. And I said, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to spend the next 600,000 or the 600,000 hours that I've been allotted on this earth toward? Am I going to maintain status quo, or am I going to try and push the needle with my life energy? So I called my wife. We decided to quit our jobs. We converted a Westphalia van to run on vegetable oil. Before we used that van, we flew over to Denmark. We studied renewable energy at the Folk Center for Renewable Energy for 6 months. That was a transformative experience. And we realized that the world could be powered on renewables. Then we came back to North America, hopped in our hippie van, and drove across Canada, US, and Mexico, running on donut and Malaysian spring roll oil. And yes, your car does smell like spring rolls or donuts or whatever oil you've used to fuel your car. Whatever it fried is what your car smells like, or vehicle. And that's when I kind of remembered that Jeff Lawton video and said, it's time for us to take a PDC. And I was not an ecologist or a biologist. In fact, I failed those things in in high school. And after the PDC, I realized that the simple lessons that had been taught in needs and yields and zones and sectors transformed my engineering career and my knowledge in very profound ways, because an engineering degree doesn't really teach you how to design. It's all math, basically. You learn your design trade when you get out of school. And so permaculture helped to kind of complete the circle there. And I looked at my wife and I said, I'm going to teach this stuff. And she says, you're crazy. Like, you don't have a biology or an ecology degree. How are you going to teach permaculture design? I said, I don't know, but I will. And so I ended up then going to Australia, and I studied with Jeff Lawton for 3 months. And then I traveled to every permaculture site that I could find. I bought a small car in Australia, and I just traveled around and worked for people in Australia, learning as much as I could. And then came back to Canada, started Verge Permaculture. We've since taught over 5,000 permaculture students and over 10,000 students in all the other programs that Verge offered over the last 20 years. And then meanwhile, I was doing consulting right across North America on off-grid homesteads with a small company called Adaptive Habitat. And it was through the consulting at Adaptive Habitat that was the seed that started Fifth World, which is what I'm working on right now.
Wow, that was a whistle stop tour. one thing I would comment on as another engineer I've met. As it seems every other person in permaculture is an engineer, which
Interesting.
is great to see. Yeah. Uh, there's a lot of us in here, so I'm an engineer as well.
Okay. Nice.
Uh, yeah, and I had Graham on. He's a chemical engineer. Margie Whitecraft was an electrical engineer, and there's countless others as well. Must be a transferable set of skills.
Well, I think we're systems people. I think that's the connection there. And so you start looking for systems. The other thing that really kind of shocks me, and I've been posting this mostly in comments on LinkedIn recently, but engineers learn about the second law of thermodynamics, the concept of entropy, which is essentially a measure of chaos. And so the higher the entropy, the more the chaos. And so we know that little children are entropy machines. If you've got a child, they destroy everything and they make messes everywhere they go. And I think for me anyways, when I learned about entropy in university, it was like a 30-minute lesson. And the end point was, well, entropy is always increasing and eventually we'll hit heat death. The universe will just die from the entropic state that it gets to. But nowhere in my education anyways, until I started learning permaculture, was the discussion about syntropy, which is the opposite of entropy, ever discussed. And so syntropy is the other side of the token, or the other side of the coin. And nature depends on, different people have different takes on it, but nature either is reducing entropy, or so it's making it smaller, the number, or it's at least slowing it down. And so it depends on how you look at the dynamics of an ecosystem. But it's one of the most hopeful concepts in the entire world, because if you believe what the thermodynamics text says, we might as well just smoke them while we've got them and kind of extract as much as we can, as fast as we possibly can. But if you look at the permaculture texts, and even like Howard Odom's work, who is the grandfather of ecology, we actually as a species should be doing everything we possibly can to enhance syntropic systems. And if you understand what permaculture is all about, it's through syntropy that we are able to meet our needs without destroying the ecosystems around us.
Yeah. So if you go back to, I seen before from your videos, you had an urban homestead.
Mm-hmm.
So did you start building that alongside when you were doing your PDC and learning and going all these courses?
Yeah. So when we came back, because we quit our really high paying jobs, we were making a lot of money in the oil and gas industry, and we walked away from it. The way that we managed to make this transition to a very low income lifestyle, which had lots of benefits, by the way. It sounds negative, but it was actually very, very good for a lot of reasons. We partnered with Michelle's mom. And so she created space in her house, in her basement suite. And we were there for a long time. I was starting to make jokes that we were never going to leave. And so we'd have to write a book, How to Save the World from Your Mother-in-Law's Basement Suite. Never got written. But the idea there was she had some resources. She wanted to retrofit her house. And so we did a deep energy retrofit on her building. We put a food forest into the front yard, harvested all of the rainwater, put an annual garden into the backyard, and we found a space to build my first passive solar greenhouse, which is still standing today, so that I could start experimenting with low energy buildings that allow places like Calgary, that has only 100 frost-free days, cold nights, so not very many growing degree days. And so experimenting with passive solar greenhouses allowed me to extend our growing season and do some unique things in that ecosystem that normally are not
Yeah. So how would you advise someone who wanted to start in that urban setting, since you've done it all? Where would they start in such a small space or small growing period?
Small is great. And I think it's important that like people know that permaculture is not just about growing. It's about the whole system. And so it's about how the systems inside the house work. It's about how the systems outside the house work. And so I think it's really important to start with your goals, actually. And we wrote a whole book on this, not just goals, but like design. It's called Building Your Permaculture Property. And the first step is to identify your nine forms of your basically your different forms of capital. And so the different forms of capital kind of give you a sense of what you've got access to. And we tend to get really focused on the financial capital that we have in the bank, but we forget about all the other forms of capital that are just lying around. And so, like, if you think about my mother-in-law, she had some financial capital. She also had a house. She had a piece of property. And so we didn't have to acquire those things in order to be able to start learning. And so most people are millionaires. They just don't know it yet. The reason that they don't know it is they haven't done a holistic balance sheet to understand the different forms of capital that you've got access to. And I always forget all the different forms, but it's not actually our innovation. It was Gregory Landrieu and Ethan Rowland that came up with, I think it's the 8 forms of capital. I always forget. So you've got financial, material capital. So financial is money. We've talked about that. Material capital. So those are like the things that you own: your car, your house, tools, anything that's like physical. Living capital. So this is anything that you've got that is alive or could be alive. So seeds, fruit trees, any plants, any animals that have the ability to replicate. Your social capital. So that you could probably like put my mother-in-law in there in terms of like having the ability to leverage her resources. She got benefit from it as well. It wasn't a one-way street. Spiritual capital, which is like, why do you get up in the morning? Experiential capital, intellectual capital, and cultural capital. So experiential is things that you've done or you have experience in. Intellectual are things that you know, and cultural capital is the one form of capital that you can't own on your own. It's what you collectively own within a community. And it's 8 forms of capital. I always get it wrong. And so once you've kind of got an inventory of the resources that you've got access to, then you can start to think about what things that you can influence in your day-to-day. And so if you don't have a whole bunch of money, but you've got a huge community, you've probably got a ton of resources there that you can start to use or work with in order to get started. And so everybody's going to start in probably a slightly different place. But if you're speaking about gardening specifically, Mollison used to say, I don't care how you build a garden. Like, everybody gets really dogmatic about doing this or doing that. He's like, there's a million ways to grow food. And just start, basically, and choose a methodology that works for you. And I think that's really a great statement, because sometimes people get paralysis by analysis. And so what I usually recommend people do if they're just starting their food growing journey is to get a book called Square Foot Gardening from your local used bookstore. It usually costs about $3 because millions of them were printed. And it gives you really prescriptive planting plans. It's a really great methodology for growing in tiny spaces. And if you do that for a few years, you're gonna kick off with success. And success in the first couple of years is really important because it'll give you the dopamine hit to keep going. And then over time, what you'll find is that you don't need to go to that kind of, some people will stick with the structure, and other people will find other ways that kind of align with their personality. And interestingly enough, the guy that wrote Square Foot Gardening was an engineer. And so you can kind of get that sense when you read his book, because it's very structured. So just start is the answer. Where you start is going to depend on your resources, your skills, and what's available. And you build from success. Now, the big thing to not do is to not start super big. And that's a hard thing for most men to kind of get their heads around. Because if you start really big and you have a really big failure, you're likely to stop. And one thing that like really drives me crazy is all the comments that people make on social media. I haven't seen them too recently, but for a while there was a lot of negativity around permaculture. Oh, it doesn't work, or permaculture sucks, or, you know, it's not practical. And it's kind of funny because all permaculture is a design system. It's a way of thinking about how to lay things out. And so if you're saying permaculture doesn't work, you just don't understand it. It's like saying engineering doesn't work. Well, it's just a design system. You're probably just a bad engineer if engineering doesn't work, because we've been using it for hundreds of years. So start small. Know that you're going to make mistakes, and as those mistakes come, that's just information coming into your system. And information is useless unless you put it to productive use. So observe the negative or positive feedback mechanisms and pivot, and keep pivoting until you figure out what system works for you and your landscape and your home.
Yeah, that's great advice. So we have a square foot gardening blog on our website if you want to go and check that out.
Nice.
It's on Square Foot Garden, and it just points you to the right resources to go. I always recommend it to design clients when they start off as well, because it's digestible. They can make a list and they can just crack at it, and they just go, right, there's a list there for them to follow, and grow what you eat as well on that Square Foot Garden, because then you can reap the rewards instead of being stuck with a pile of stuff you don't like. Yeah, don't go big. So that's what I did as well. I started small. I've done various systems and just added on to them over the years. I've actually stripped out my garden last year, and now I'm building a more like holistic system, a systems approach, and that's taken me 10 years of gardening to get to that.
Nice.
Just trying different things, and so now I'm integrating. I'm going to be integrating chickens with compost, and then small space gardening. That's really very manageable with 1 or 2 hours a week. So, but that's taken me 10 years of trying stuff and failing. So it takes a while to get there. And then online, we could spend ages on the rubbish that's the dribble that's on there.
Yeah.
And the cult of permaculture, and this isn't permaculture. That drives me mad.
Yeah.
And I just think it's hilarious when I heard a term recently called perma bros.
Okay.
So it's a derogatory term, I think, towards men who want to like earn money and create a business around permaculture. It's just it's just like, well, aye, whatever. And then I moved on. It was just like, it was quite amusing. So your PDC, where did you do your PDC?
So I did 2. My first one was the Bullock Brothers. So they were originally taught by Bill Mollison. They live on Orcas Island, just off of the coast of Washington, or just not far from Seattle. And then the second one that I took was in Australia with Jeff Lawton, and that's also where I did my Earthworks training. Jeff and I are still colleagues today. So, and then I did a third one, actually. So the first PDC that we hosted as Verge, I actually hired Jesse Lemieux to come and teach. And so, and I believe he taught with us twice. And so technically I've taken 4 and started my teaching journey as I was learning from Jesse. And for people that want to get started, I've helped a lot of people get started in the teaching of permaculture. And people say, well, you know, if you don't have X number of years of experience, you can't teach. And I don't actually agree with that. Because again, I think people get really caught up on the gardening piece. Like, it's one of the things, again, and I just have to keep harping on this. People say, well, permaculture is just gardening on steroids. And it's like, well, no, not really. It's a systems science. And the first few chapters in the design manual and all of the intro book, Introduction to Permaculture, they're very, very easy concepts to get your head around. And once you understand them, you can have a transformative effect on someone's life just by teaching some simple ideas to the people. And, what's interesting is that I think design is intrinsic in human nature. And let me just explain that just a little bit. Whenever you walk into someone's house or backyard, or pretty much any space where humans kind of occupy, it's very common. People may not verbalize it all the time unless they're specifically asked for their opinion, but it's very common to look at that space and you're like, oh man, what a dumb place for a fridge. Or why would they put the sink there? Like, oh my gosh, this space is absolutely perfect. I love how they've laid everything out. And then when you buy a house, the first thing that you're thinking about is, okay, how do I customize this space for what's perfect for me? And you can't customize a space unless you understand how to do design. And who taught you? Some people take courses on design. You know, I would argue that engineering is not a design course, even though everybody thinks it is. It's a major in mathematics with a couple of applied physics courses. You don't really learn design, at least not in my engineering program. We didn't. And so design is something that we innately do. And when you give people a few simple tools like understanding basic weather patterns, understanding work triangles, that's all really kind of what needs and yields are, is like positioning things in space and time. And in fact, you can kind of distill permaculture design into 4 categories, which is the appropriate design of scale, time, placement, and form. And this was an insight that I had just before writing the book, Building Your Permaculture Property. You know, Mollison talks a lot about placement. He talks about form. He talks about time, but he doesn't talk a ton about scale. And scale, I think, is a really, I mean, he does in his own way, but he doesn't like explicitly discuss it in his book. And so if you think about scale, time, placement, and form, you can rank any design on planet Earth in terms of whether it's regenerative, sustainable, or degenerative based upon how you describe those 4 elements of design. And so an introduction to permaculture that's taught properly should be able to teach people those 4 concepts about scale, time, placement, and form. And you will fundamentally change the way that people view the world once they understand how to view the world through those 4 things. And then design will kind of naturally emerge out of that.
Yeah, and I take it that you supplement that into your courses then.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big part of the courses.
How would I start learning? You say you have a book there?
So we've written a book called Building Your Permaculture Property, and that's both on Audible and on wherever you buy your books. So you can listen to it and you can read it. It's it's not going to teach you how to build a pond. It's not going to teach you how to grow a garden. It's not going to teach you any of the tactical skills that everybody loves to obsess about on Instagram and all of the socials. It's going to teach you how to think about design. It's going to teach you, it's basically a 5-step process. And, you know, being a designer yourself, I think you'd agree that once you've done it for long enough, you don't go out into your backyard and say, well, first I'm going to start with step 1, and then I'm going to start with step 2. And then for you and for experienced designers, design is a non-linear process that as you get better at it, all of the steps kind of happen simultaneously. However, we still live in a temporal space, or like a space that's still dictated by in 3 dimensions plus a 4th dimension of time. And when we learn, we have to learn in discrete steps. And so the book basically takes you through the 5 steps that we think are really important to master over time. And as you master those 5 steps, the 5 steps will disappear into the background and you'll just be a designer. And so that's the whole premise behind that book.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it'll go on my reading list. Yeah, so for me, a lot of people say, "Oh, you must know a lot about plants." It's like, well, the plants are the icing on the cake. It's how you move through the space. It's like, what time have you got? All these other factors, and then the plants come at the very end because the plants perform a function that you want them to serve. Yeah. And that's what I always struggle with. People just say, "Oh, you must be a plant expert." Like, no, I'm not a plant expert. It's just the plants serve a purpose.
Yeah.
And then the teaching thing as well. I think was it Jeff and Bill were on an old video saying basically once you get your PDC, you can teach. In the UK, it's very strict. Like I'm doing a diploma at the minute, but I can't graduate until I've 2 years after my PDC date, which for me I'd started anyway. But to me, it's just a nominal amount of time. Particularly like Graham over Permaculture Canada. He's been practicing for 30, 40 years. and then he got his PDC, and you tell me he can't teach. It's just, and then there's someone who has never been in the garden or just gets a PDC, and then it's like, should they be teaching? But to me, it's merit based, not on any sort of function of time or diplomas or teaching things. So that in the US is different as well. I think everybody has their own. It just sometimes irks me. These people just get together as an association, say, right, these are rules now. It's like, no, well, they're your rules, not my rules.
Yeah, there's pros and cons to it all. And I think that, we have to look at both sides of the equation there. But Mollison's original intent was, I believe someone tried to patent the word, actually, and he beat them to it. And then he gave the patent or the trademark to the School of Graduates. So the word is collectively owned by anybody who's taken a permaculture design course. That was the original intention. And he said once to me, I met him a couple of times, that if you're good enough to stand up there and teach for 72 hours and keep everybody's attention, you're probably an okay teacher. And if you're not, they're going to mulch you. And then the other thing that Jeff said to me was, like, a good teacher should aim to create 2 to 3 teachers per 100 students that you teach. That's like a metric of success. And, both Jeff and Bill were very closely aligned on these things. And one of the things that I love most about permaculture is the open source nature of it. And that's also a double-edged sword. And I learned the hard way. It's really difficult to become a millionaire. Not that that's my goal, but I'm just saying, like, to make lots of money doing this. Another one of those kind of things that people love to hate or love to do on socials is like, well, the only way to make money at permaculture is teaching. And it's like, well, maybe that's possible. And if that's true, who cares? Like, why is that a problem? The world is rapidly heading towards degeneration. And, permaculture has been around for 30 or 40 years and it still hasn't scaled properly. And by scale, I mean, like, there's still not enough people taking care of their own supply chains in their own backyard. A lot of times when we hear the word scale, we think of giant corporations that are teaching permaculture, like giant universities. That's not a metric of success in permaculture. Scaling in permaculture is the same way that a pig scales or an apple tree scales. Like, if you think about how nature scales, it actually puts all of its scaling function as information. So a seed is like a really efficient way of moving information. And same with, like, an embryo and sperm in kind of a set of mammals. These are very lightweight things that carry an enormous amount of information. And so if you think about a permaculture teacher or people that are teaching permaculture, we're literally just handing packets of information, little seeds, to other people to create self-replicating mechanisms. And the goal is a decentralized world of individuals that are able to take at least a percentage of responsibility of their actions. Like, if you go back to the prime directive of permaculture, it's take responsibility for yourself and that of your children, and get your house and garden in order so that it shelters and feeds us. And almost nobody does this. Like, every house pretty much in a city these days requires a constant input of natural gas. It requires us to make enormous amounts of money to keep it going, to pay the mortgage, which means death pledge in French, by the way. Mort gage is death pledge. In France, they don't have mortgages. They have hypothèques, because I don't think they could sell it if it was called a death pledge. And then taking responsibility for our children and that of our actions. It's like, it's easy to go around and point fingers at what everybody else is doing wrong, but what are you doing? And this was my insight in the oil and gas industry when I left, was like, I can't criticize this industry if I'm consuming its products. That makes me a hypocrite. And in fact, the first thing that I've always done in every course, because I know that I have, especially in my province, I have a lot of oil and gas people that come to my classes. We never criticize the oil and gas industry, because I still drive a car. I still use some fossil fuels, and it's not fair to point fingers at any one person or any one industry if I still am if I'm still fundamentally using those resources myself. So yeah, I mean, Mollison's intent was open source, spread the information, scale through replication as fast as possible, and like if you think about the concept of letting systems kind of show their own evolutions, which is what we do. We plant a system, or we set up animals, or any system that we create, whether it's physical or biological. At some point, you have to relinquish control back to the system. That's the whole point of a syntropic system. There's a certain amount of autonomy that a food forest has once it gets established. That's the whole point, is that its food is generated with little input. We can think of human systems in the same way. And so we can get really structured and kind of control who gets to come out the back end and distribute the information. That's one approach. And there's, like I said, pros and cons to that. Or we can let it grow more organically and know that there's going to be some systems or people or teachers that just don't resonate. But overall, the system will self-govern, and it will news will spread, especially through the internet, and those people will not be representing that information for very long, because their reputation will rapidly decline if they don't do a good job of representing the information or give people a good experience.
Yeah, so it's just a meritocracy. It works. So for the making money point, I have interviewed 60 or 70 people now on this podcast that are making money in permaculture, so I would disagree with that.
Yeah, I do too.
And again, it's whether you're a designer, teacher, you keep bees, you're a landscaper. There's all different variations on it. There's people in finance in it, writing books about permaculture lifestyle, and then it's applying it in your own area and revolutionizing your own area. Say you're I know you're a builder, but you could still build houses, but build them more sustainable. Yeah. And bring the permaculture practices on it. So it's not, to me, it's very narrow to say it's just permaculture. There's so many aspects. So you have to bring it into every aspect in life, in every other profession. So don't definitely agree with that. And then if people are teaching, we're in an expansion phase, so we need to expand it out. So you need teachers. Like, there's no two ways about it.
Yeah. You don't do permaculture, you use it within what you do. And I think if we kind of keep that front of mind, and then what happens is the people that say, oh, you can't make money at permaculture, what they're actually saying is like, I don't know how to make money. That's what they're saying. Because there's so, like you say, there's so many ways to apply the ideas in permaculture to every like facet of the economy.
Yeah. I see sort of, you've mentioned there, you've gone to courses, you've obviously learned from the best. So you've obviously realised earlier on the importance of getting training and getting good training, and taking 3 months to Australia. Do you want to tell us about that mindset and how that could help people learn?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a PDC, people, you know, I've been on the business side of it for a long time, and I've sold a lot of courses over the years, and some people, you know, understand the value of education and getting trained and getting experiences, and other people kind of balk at the cost of a PDC. And pretty much all the PDCs I've ever seen for sale, in my opinion, are way too cheap relative to the information and the experience that you're going to end up getting. We don't seem to balk at or like buck against a $45,000 university degree, and in the States it's even more than that. And so for me, I mean, I think especially right now, and you look at the uncertainty in the world, like you look at how living in Canada right now under these tariffs and the uncertainty that's being generated by all sorts of political decisions happening. I was saying to my wife yesterday, like, you know, Canada's not immune to a sovereign debt crisis like Argentina has been dealing with for 50 years. And we could find ourselves in a situation where the Canadian dollar basically trends towards zero. I already make jokes about it being kind of the northern peso. But, you know, as our dollar kind of loses value against the US currency. But what's really interesting about permaculture knowledge is that it's one of those things that it grows in value as you use it, for a lot of reasons. And you can come at this from so many angles. So like like if we just look at the food side, growing your own food has dramatic implications on your gut microbiome. It has implications on your pocketbook, how much money you have in your bank. And it's also an incredible insurance policy. So this year, Canadians are expecting to spend about 17,000 Canadian dollars in groceries. And if you net that out to before tax dollars based on what you're paying in taxes, that could be easily $25,000 or $28,000 in earned income that you have to make in order to just to buy groceries. And so as the currency devalues, as inflation hits us really hard in various parts of the world, I just read today that India is not going to be able to meet their sugar quota. Like they're going to produce less than they consume. And so as our agricultural systems lose productivity, as the nutrient density of our food goes down, all of these things that we learn in a permaculture system, as our energy prices go up, they all start to increase in value. And so our own knowledge is an appreciating asset. It comes back down to the 8 forms of capital, which is the experiential and the intellectual. So the experiences that you've had and the things that you know, everything that you learn in a permaculture system, if you practice it, becomes more valuable over time. So while the Canadian dollar is losing value, my skill set is actually becoming higher valued. And so I'm actually in a, I would say my skills are tracking inflation or exceeding inflation in terms of the value that I have to offer to other people. So investing in yourself is super valuable, in my opinion.
Yeah. As I see, a number of courses come out recently, and I think one was criticized for charging too much or something. Yeah, that's like crazy. It's like there's free courses out there, so it's free. But if you, for example, if I'm looking to see if I have a major water project, I want to capture water in my climate zone. Find out who's the best person and go and learn from them, whether it's their YouTube channel or you just go and take a course. So again, it's to me, it's time versus resources. If you have the time, go learn. If you have the resource, go learn quicker.
Or hire someone.
Yeah.
And I should say, Cormac, that I have never said no to somebody that couldn't afford our course. I think that's important to remember. And so like I've always given scholarships, and I learned the hard way because I've given a lot of scholarships to people who either didn't finish the program, or I had one guy who took our course. Actually, his grandfather paid for it because he couldn't afford it. And he slept through most of the program. He didn't have any skin in the game. So I think like putting money down also creates a level of commitment. And so what we ended up doing with our scholarships was we would get people to actually write a 2-page précis on why they should get a scholarship and how they're going to use the information to better themselves and their community. And that weeded out a lot of people in terms of like giving away free courses. Like the people that actually took that time to write that were committed, and they've done amazing things with it. So I think there's an important piece to all of this, that we should make these things accessible, but we shouldn't necessarily charge the lowest common denominator. And I'll tell you why. For the first few years that we taught in-person courses, we were hosting residential courses, which are by far the best courses to take. And I still wish that I could teach those today. And so a residential course, you show up on site, you're there for 2 weeks straight. Sometimes some of them are 3 weeks. They feed you, they house you. You build an incredibly tight community in that period of time. And we used to charge $2,500 for that course. And when we did the books on it, by the time we paid for all the organic food, because we didn't grow it off of our own property at that time, the chef and the venue, I was working for free. And at $2,500, we were getting people saying, "Oh, this is too expensive. I can't afford it." And it's like, I can't afford to teach it. Like realistically, I should have charged $5,000 for a 2-week experience like that. but we were just getting started and we had to gain some momentum. So when we charge appropriately for the value that's being delivered, then we can offer scholarships to people and make it accessible for the people that don't have the ability to put that information to productive use. And YouTube's an amazing resource too. Like you said, there's so much information on there. So just spend hours on YouTube, but eventually you'll figure it out.
Yeah, no, that's I like the 2-pager. That's a really good thing. I'll keep that one in mind. That's one worth sharing. So then, Verge Permaculture. How's that going? Am I going to the conference? Was it 4 years ago? I really enjoyed that conference, the live one. I take it that took its toll because he's rowing all day. He's never stopped. There was it Mitch and what do you call him? He was on the podcast here as well.
Dakota?
No, not Dakota. He's doing landscape architecture now.
Oh, Ben Dunn.
Yeah, so and them two were hosting like the break and the competitions. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was one heck of a conference to put on. We did it a couple of times. Verge right now is actually on pause, to be totally frank. We've put it to the side for the moment while we're focusing on fewer things. And so mostly right now, my time is spent doing design work. Verge will emerge again in the future, probably as a different thing and a different offering. I have some visions of what I want it to look like, and I can float those out there. Like I think I'd love to. Speaking of free, I mean, I think as information trends towards nothing, I do have a vision of like packaging up an entire PDC and finding people in developing countries that are needing the information and again have the gumption, and then supporting them with some financial resources. So actually paying them money to either get through the program or to provide them with a computer. Like $1 in Canada barely does anything, but $1 in Kenya or Uganda or any of those countries has an incredible amount of leverage. And so one kind of dream that I have is like almost like a venture studio where if I could raise, $50,000 to $100,000 and essentially create like a competition and kind of like, I haven't watched it, definitely I'm not going to, but like the Beast Games kind of thing that's on Amazon Prime right now. So imagine like a Beast Games, less fake, more authentic, where we can take money and then basically give people grants essentially. So they got to take a program. Everybody goes through it at the same time. They need a piece of land, either theirs or somebody else's. And then they can use that grant to basically implement their design. And it's a 1-year competition. And at the end of it, we rank it. And then there's a prize at the end. And it might be a cash prize, but it could be something a little bit more holistic than just giving them a bunch of money. I don't know what it would be, but the point is like, you and I live in the developed world and things are just perpetually getting more expensive. And so our ability to impact change, and I haven't talked to you about your, what your driving mission and vision is as an individual, but I suspect it's similar to mine. Like most people in permaculture kind of have a similar ethos and a similar vision of the future. For me, I think about my kids and their kids and the kids after that. And like, what do I have to do? What are the behaviors that I have to have now to make sure that they have a higher chance of living in a sane, healthy world? And so when I think about that, and I think about the fact that I've burned through half of my life hours now, where can I gain the most leverage for every dollar an hour I invest? And it's probably in Mexico, Africa, South America, finding hungry people there, hungry as in, well, maybe they're physically hungry, but also like hungry for knowledge and a desire to make change. And then how do I support them? And like, I don't have to do very much, like a little bit of work here spent over there can have massively leveraged results.
Yeah, that's class. If we can help out anyway as well when you launch that, just let us know. I think it's something. So my mission is much the same. Well, to me, it's like in 2 generations we've lost. Like my grandparents grew food and had pigs, and in 2 generations it was gone completely. So I want to just teach my kids the skills to do it. Sort of not covertly, but just not make it a big deal. This is just what you do. You have to have these set of skills. You need to read, you need to write, you need to grow food, you need to know these basic skills. So not fear based, it's just for the benefits of it. So you teach them what, like if they don't like an organic carrot or a carrot grown out the back, it's totally different than a normal carrot, lettuce, things like that. I like them going out the front, picking fruit, teaching them what fruit we absolutely like 1 foot of a food. No, they're eating a food for where it was grown. That just teaches them basic skills and have that just in their lives.
Yeah.
And try and influence them that way. So that's as far as my bigger vision has gone. It's just at the minute I'm still at that and trying to build a property that provides that for them, and then moving on. Then I don't know where I would take it, but that's just the focus at the minute.
It's interesting because, like, as a designer now, that's mostly what I do. The typical North American, like, there are people that are kind of on the front end of the curve, like the adoption curve, but the majority of people still aren't, adopters yet. They're not early adopters. I still think we're kind of in the early adopter phase. And at least in Canada and probably Ireland too, we have the most amount of water, we have the most amount of soil, we have the most amount of forests, we have the most amount of potash, we have the most amount of oil, we have the most amount of natural gas. And so we can end up looking like Chicken Little, saying, we got to do something, the sky's falling down. And then yet you go to Costco or Tesco or whatever, wherever you buy your stuff, and the shelves are full of shiny things. They look delicious. They taste delicious. We know that they're not necessarily as good as they look from a nutrient perspective, but whereas when you go to a place like Africa or South America or Central America, like, things are not great there. Like, they are not meeting their basic needs. And so when we really break down what a permaculture designer or teacher does, we are earth repair technicians. And so if you're trying to fix something in a system where people don't think it's broken, it can get very discouraging very quickly. But in fact, like, where we're needed is where people know that the systems are broken. They're open to new ideas. And what I like about teaching and the concept of teaching versus like just showing up and planting a design somewhere is that people will always out-design me in their own system because they know it better. They know their context. They know what they need. They're going to have a more acute sense of the feedback loops. So they'll know when something's not working for them or for their ecosystems. And yeah, it's a hard road. Like you say, it's like learning permaculture is kind of like learning a martial art. You don't just take one jujitsu class and then you're a black belt. It's a 10 or 15 year commitment. It's a lifelong journey, and you have to commit to it. And maybe we should have a belt system in permaculture. I don't know, but I think that what's good about the belt system in martial arts is that that it's a journey. That there's a long commitment required in order to reach mastery. And that's maybe one of the advantages of having a centralized credentialing system, maybe. But the reality is that permies are anarchist at best, and there's a lot like anarchy can be a really great thing in certain scenarios. They're cheap, which is because they're trying to take care of themselves, and so it's really difficult to kind of build a credentialing system that's sustainable when you kind of got a mindset like you do in the permaculture space.
Yeah, I've encountered all sorts of, from anarchists to bureaucrats. It's been quite interesting. Rob, we're hitting 50 minutes here. So I wanted to talk about the data, the Fitbit for land.
Yeah, so it's not actually called Fitbit for land. I just say that
I was just
as a metaphor. But so Fifth World's original mission, it still is, I would say, but we have to take several steps to get there, is how do we regenerate Earth's biosphere in a very, within a generation, basically. So our hypothesis was that one of the there's a few key barriers to preventing this from happening. One is money. I think everybody knows that more money needs to be available in order to speed this system up. Money will unlock new demonstration and new examples. The other thing that's missing is data. And in fact, actually, there's lots of data out there. It's actually not a data problem. It's how do we put the data together into a usable format? And so for the last 3 years, we've done a pretty substantial research project. We studied 1,500 hectares of land in Argentina. We looked at organic, conventional, and regenerative farms. We studied 90 different metrics on those 3 land uses. We had 15 ecologists and biologists, ranging from ornithologists to insect specialists to amphibian specialists to soil specialists. We used things like soil acoustics. We used bioacoustics, so we listened for birds using humans as well as AI tools. We looked at NVDI, so we looked at hyperspectral photography from space. In the end, we found 10 statistically significant metrics that allowed us to determine state changes in ecosystem health. Those 10 metrics came out significantly positive for regen land practices. So organic was better than conventional in most cases. Regen was better than everything in all cases within those 10 metrics. We also have a genius in our company. We have lots of geniuses in our company, but he's an astrophysicist and he specializes in remote sensing. And so we used a framework developed by Robert Costanza, who's I'm not sure if he's still around, but he's a British economist. And he, in the 1990s, developed a framework called VORS, which stands for Vigor, Organization, and Resilience. And he put together a rough budget estimate on the value of ecosystem services back in the 90s. VORS is recognized as one of the most credible mechanisms to rank the health of an ecosystem. And so we developed a remote sensing algorithm that can use hyperspectral imagery from space to create proxies for vigor, organization, and resilience. And so what we do, if we're looking at a piece of property, is we can scan the healthiest chunk of land that we can find within a 20-kilometer radius, and we can measure its health. So we measure all of those factors using remote sensing. And then we look at the property of interest, so let's say your property, and then we rank it against the healthiest property that we can find. And so as healthier properties emerge, that bar will get harder to meet. And in the end, it produces a health score, a percentage out of 100, with regards to how healthy your landscape is relative to the benchmark in that area. The goal there was to, it's great to see on LinkedIn and various other social media platforms, like the before and the after, they're very stark. But what if those before and afters actually had an objective measure saying, like, before it had an ecological health of 0% or 10. And then after, within 1 year, it jumped by 20%. And then within 3 years, it jumped 50%. And so if we look at the regen projects that we're seeing, if we started actually putting objective data on there, it would, I think, add a lot of credibility to the space. As we see the climate narrative shifting right now, we're starting to see interest in ecosystem services. And so while it's really difficult to measure amphibians and insects from space, what we can do is we can say that if we think about ecosystems as an atom, there's neutrons and there's protons that kind of form up the nucleus. We can think about the physical things in an ecosystem that don't move as like neutrons and protons. And then we can think of the diversity around those things as the electrons. And if you remember back in chemistry, we don't know where the electrons actually are. We can think about them. They live in orbits, and there's certain probabilities that certain electrons are going to exist at certain periods of time in those orbits. And that's the same way that we can think about diversity. And so if we can make sure that the right protons and neutrons are there in the right order and the right conductivity, and they're showing the right amount of vigor, which is what we have control over, because we can actually, that's what a permaculturist does, is that we place those things in a landscape. Then we can increase the probability that the diversity is actually going to show up. And so that's how we're thinking about measuring these things. And so the goal is to basically give feedback to designers, to businesses, and anybody else that wants to understand how their land management portfolio is shifting in time. But then the other thing that the tool does is we can take what used to cost my clients $25,000 to get a pre-feasibility study on a property. We can do all of that work now digitally, or at least 80% of it, for about $3,000. And so we've taken the design process, that first initial design, that concept planning process, and we've reduced the marginal cost by about a factor of 10. And so now at the back end of this health score, not only do you get a health score on the property, but you also get what we call a probabilistic design. And so we place we give the designer basically all the information that they need to know where the best likely places for roads can be, where's the most likely places for ponds to be, what are the kind of climatic factors that we've seen over the last 30 years on a daily basis, so using big data, and how might that influence the property into the future. What are the sectors? What is the forest fire risk? What is the flood risk? What is the we could do a whole episode just on how this design.
Yeah, I was thinking that. So is that for like a designer like myself? I have a client who's 50 acres. I come to you and say, "Can you do this for me?"
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so it takes a lot of that really hard research work. And essentially, I mean, what it is a whole bunch of custom programmed GIS layers that look at things through a probabilistic lens that have been packaged up into some software. And it not only reduces the marginal cost of design, like by 10, but it also reduces the time frame. Now, it doesn't replace the designer. I think that's super important to say, because you still need, the map is not the territory. You still need to go onto the property, and you need to look at all these probabilistic opportunities and say, yeah, that makes sense. No, that doesn't make sense. So you still need to run it through the filter of a human mind. And the goal is not to replace humans at all. Like, we need humans to interact with their landscapes. The point is to basically give leverage and to make permaculture, to reduce the marginal cost of it so that more people can do it.
That sounds fascinating. I would love to spend an hour chatting to you about it. Where do I find information on that?
So you can Google Fifth World Regen Tracker, and you'll get the URL for that. And you can probably put it in the show notes if people want to click through to it.
Yeah, that's great. I'll put that in the link. Rob, that's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, and happy to come back and chat about Regen Tracker and how I think it's going to transform the world of design and ecology.
That would be awesome. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. We'll get you back on. Guys, that's been Rob Avis, and that's been the Permaculture Vine podcast. We'll catch you all next week, and all the links are in the description. Thanks.